Sure enough, here's the plain text portion of the expanded Invisible Footsteps story, which you can use directly for the text-to-speech engine. I still vividly remember the first time I heard those footsteps, the heavy thud echoing in an otherwise silent hallway. My pulse was already pounding, as the distinct feeling that something was wrong was in the air. I chose that tiny cubicle of commerce as my personal refuge, a decision motivated by the need to focus on personal projects without the distractions of a busy office or the bustle of a co-working space. The building itself was old, with a single light outside and the parking lot flickering like it was about to go out. From the moment I stepped into the first evening, an uncomfortable cold crawled down my spine. The hallway smelled of stagnant air and cleaning chemicals, a stale mixture that did nothing to soothe my growing unease. Even then, I tried to brush it off, telling myself that it was just the awkwardness of the first day, that everything would become normal once I got used to the routine. But that normal never comes. The decision to sign a lease stems from the incredibly low price and absolute quietness of the area. The homeowner, an austere-looking man, also mentioned the building's age, but he insisted the structure was still solid, just needing some interior renovations that might take place at an unspecified time in the future. I found my room on the top floor, an isolated corner with a single rectangular window overlooking the narrow street below. During the day, weak sunlight crept in, drawing dusty sunlight streaks on the floor. But when night fell, that window reflected nothing but solid darkness, as if the world outside had ceased to exist after sunset. There was an oppressive feeling of stillness, an almost tangible pressure that made me hold my breath every time I looked outside, trying in vain to find the city lights. The first night, I worked late. A strange mixture of excitement and fear overtook me. The hallway becomes so dark that after a certain hour, it resembles a tunnel stretching into nothingness. I briefly thought I heard something, a soft rustle, perhaps someone else working on the same floor. But then I glanced at the clock, 9 p.m. Other tenants, who worked 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., had long since gone home. The cleaning staff only comes early in the morning, so I'm sure the building is completely empty. It's just me. I try to push away the thought that I wasn't alone, making excuses for the building's old ventilation ducts. Sometimes, old infrastructure can make sounds like footsteps or whispers. At least, that's what I try to convince myself. But by the end of the first week, ignoring those footsteps became more difficult than ever. They have a fixed, clear rhythm, as if of a person wearing leather-soled shoes, each step deliberately, heavily tapping the floor. I glanced at the clock again, around 9 p.m., and felt a lump in my throat, as if I was waiting for that scary sound. The footsteps always began softly, a distant presence at the end of the hallway. Then they came closer, clearer. My heart beat faster with each echo. My palms were wet, my breath choked in my chest. Finally, they walked right through my door, their footsteps bouncing off the walls, and then disappeared into the darkness on the opposite side of the hallway. Every time, I jumped in my chair, terrified to face whatever was outside. However, a strange, almost pathological curiosity gnawed at me. I wanted to rush out and throw open that door and confirm that no one was there. But for many nights, I just sat there, paralyzed, feeling my stomach twist with fear. On a particularly stressful evening, my nerves have been worn down throughout the day. A work deadline is approaching, and I'm behind schedule on an important project. The whole building seemed colder than usual. I almost jumped every time the heater rattled in the corner of the office. When the clock read 8:57 p.m., I stood up, heart racing, determined not to let fear control me any longer. I reasoned with myself that if there really was someone out there, I should have seen them approaching. So I waited, hand hovering over the doorknob, as if preparing to detonate a bomb. The footsteps began, as always, faint at first, then gradually increased in volume. My breathing became shallow, and a layer of cold sweat beaded on my forehead. My legs were shaking as if they might collapse at any moment. When footsteps sounded right outside my door, I gritted my teeth, twisted the knob, and yanked the door open. Dark. The ceiling light in the hallway was turned off, leaving only a weak light from the emergency exit sign at the end of the hallway. My first impression was that I was looking into an unknown void, an impenetrable blackness. I tried to blink, hoping my eyes would adjust, but I couldn't make out a single outline that resembled a human form. However, the footsteps continued. I heard them, so close it felt like someone was passing me. My heart was pounding, my head throbbed as blood rushed to my brain. My mouth was dry as I fought the urge to scream or run. I stood there, a pitiful statue of fear, unable to do anything but stare into the black void. Then the footsteps faded, as if rounding a corner that didn't exist in reality, and I was left alone in a heavy silence. I must have stood there with the door wide open for a full minute before my senses returned. My hands were shaking when I finally closed the door, and for the rest of the night, I couldn't concentrate on my work. I kept replaying that moment in my head. There was no shape, no shadow, no fleeting movement. However, the sound was undeniable, as real as my racing heartbeat. I began to consider the possibility that I was imagining things. Maybe the stress is beyond my tolerance. Perhaps it's a psychological phenomenon. Sometimes the brain hears what it fears the most. But deep inside, I was not convinced. That feeling is so real. The following week, I tried to gather information in a subtle way. I asked the landlord if anyone else rented a room on my floor, and if they worked late. He shook his head and said no one was renewing leases in that part of the building. The budget was tight, and I was the only one who showed any interest in that deserted hallway. He even joked that I must like solitude. I only responded with a vague smile. I mentioned hearing some noises at night, but he just shrugged. He said that old buildings often make all kinds of sounds, and if I needed anything, I could call his emergency line. That conversation made me even more uneasy. If the homeowner himself has no explanation, then I am truly alone in this mystery. Night after night, the same experience repeats itself. Around 9 p.m., those footsteps appeared out of nowhere again, echoing with that steady, ominous rhythm. My body reacted the same way each time. My pulse pounded, my breathing quickened, and I had to wipe the sweat from my forehead. I tried playing loud music, thinking that maybe I could drown out the noise. But there's no difference. Even with headphones on, I could still feel those footsteps echoing, as if the entire hallway were a giant drum. I tried leaving the door open at 8:45 p.m. with the lights on, hoping that if I spotted something right away, it would resolve the situation. Footsteps kept coming, interrupting the silence, but no one ever appeared in the doorway. It felt like an invisible presence was walking back and forth right before my eyes. As time passed, the atmosphere in my small office became increasingly stuffy. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling sometimes flicker, casting distorted shadows along the walls. The fireplace hissed at the strangest times, sending out blasts of musty-smelling heat that made me sweat even as the rest of the space was strangely cold. I felt like the walls were closing in around me. My reflection in the darkened window became a faint reminder of my own instability. Some nights, I think I see the blurry outline of a figure behind me in the glass, but every time I turn around, the office is empty. Fear began to gnaw at me so relentlessly that I began to doubt my own reality. Is my mind creating an illusion? Am I losing track of what is real? I tried to reassure myself. Perhaps this was just an elaborate trick of an overworked brain, or perhaps there was some oddity in the structure of the building that made the sound bounce back like footsteps. But my reasonable excuses began to crumble when I felt vibrations through the floor. One night, after hearing footsteps outside, I leaned down near the door and pressed my palms against the cold tile floor. Each footstep sent a small vibration into my hand, a real physical movement. It feels inexorably present. I yanked my hand away, my heart feeling like it was about to jump out of my chest, realizing that no illusion could create that kind of vibration. That moment pushed my paranoia to a new level. I started dreading the evenings, looking at the clock with the feeling that something bad was about to happen. Even during the day, I find myself startled by random sounds, a door creaking somewhere in the building, a distant car horn on the street, or the hum of an ancient ventilation system. My muscles were unconsciously tense, my jaw was clenched, and I had a near-constant tension headache. Every conversation I had with friends or colleagues about my new workspace happened indirectly. I only vaguely mentioned that the building was a little creepy or uncomfortable, but I never fully admitted my fears. I'm worried they'll think I'm paranoid or hallucinating. Eventually, my work suffered so much that I found myself facing whatever was lurking in that hallway. One Thursday night, I mustered up my courage and came up with a plan. I would arrive just before dark, set up a camera to record both audio and video from the hallway, and turn on all the lights. If there is an explanation, an intruder, or a system malfunction, I will document it. That evening, the building felt more sinister than ever. Even the elevator ride was scary, its fluorescent lights flickering just enough to make my heart race. When I got to my floor, I installed the camera in front of the door, aiming the lens so that it could cover the entire length of the hallway. After that, I retreated into the office, trying to breathe slowly. When it was almost 9 p.m., I stood behind the door, ready to rush out at the slightest noise. The footsteps started on time like clockwork, the distant knock on the door on the other side of the hallway. My heart pounded in response, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. This time, I forced my legs to move. I opened the door as the footsteps still echoed. The hallway was empty, although the footsteps continued, just a few feet away from me. It was as if an invisible figure was marching right before our eyes, defying all logic. My entire body was numb with terror. I reached out my hand into the darkness, my hand shaking, and felt nothing but cold air. And then, suddenly, the footsteps stopped, leaving me panting in the silence. After my heart rate stabilized somewhat, I checked the video from the camera again. The hallway light flickered at the exact moment I heard footsteps. The audio recorded the footsteps clearly and unmistakably, but the video doesn't show any movement, no shape. It looked as if I had opened the door to chase empty shadows. That final proof was the final straw. I felt a wave of primal fear hit me, stronger than anything I had ever experienced. This building was either haunted or was toying with my senses in a way I couldn't stand. My mind reeled with the realization that there might be something beyond my rational understanding at work here. I knew I had to leave. The feeling of constant surveillance, the thick fear in the hallways, and the eerie evidence on my recordings all convinced me that my sanity was more valuable than any cheap rent or quiet work environment. I went back one last time during the day to pack up my things. Even then, the building still gave off that icy aura. Every creak of the floor sounded like a warning. My chest felt heavy, and a thin layer of sweat dampened the collar of my shirt. By the time I carried the last box to the car, I was shaking so much I almost dropped it. I never found out the cause of those footsteps. I never asked for an explanation from the landlord beyond what he can give, because I feel it is a useless exercise. Some events defy rational explanation. I escaped that old commercial space, my work unfinished and my nights haunted by ghostly echoes. Even now, every time I pass by an empty hallway, my heart beats faster. A small part of me still expected to hear those firm, heavy footsteps. I couldn't shake the feeling that the presence in that hallway was something more than a mere oddity of a deteriorating building. I ended up running away from whatever was walking those hallways at night. However, a part of my mind was forever stuck there, listening, waiting, in awe of the echo of those incredibly real footsteps. And that last thought left me with a shiver that no amount of daylight could completely dispel.